And thank you for joining us this evening for our panel discussion in partnership with Equality Downers Grove. My name is Karen. I'm the adult program coordinator here at the Downers Grove Library, as well as the co-moderator for this event. A few quick housekeeping items. If you need to get up, feel free to do so. It's incredibly humid in this room tonight. The last event, it was 64 here, so I don't know. So we're trying to fix it. But water fountains and the restrooms are located just around the corner. We request that you mute your phones. Also, the program is being recorded, just so you know, and will be posted on the library's YouTube page and on the library's website. We had a lot of people submit questions before the event, and that will be the focus of the questions on this evening. If there is time, we will take questions from the room. We ask that all questions are asked respectfully, and that everyone acts within the library's code of conduct. Anyone who does not will be asked to leave. And now, let me introduce my co-moderator, Catherine Geis of EQTG.
Thank you, Karen. And for those of you who registered for this event and submitted questions, thank you very much. We have a plethora of questions. We have a lot of very interesting questions. Interestingly, or maybe I should say more obviously, the questions, the bulk of the questions were around youth and schools. And so there's clearly a desire to understand more of the schools are working with the LGBTQ community in the students, as well as what can be done by allies and other kinds of questions that were asked. So before we get into the questions, and Karen and I will just sort of ask these sort of back and forth, we'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves briefly to you all so that you know who's who up here. They may give you their pronouns, which is what we suggest they do. And so we'll start with you.
All right, fantastic. I am Ashley, or Ash O'Connor. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a graduate of Downers Grove South from the class of 2022. Thank you. And I'm a part of Youth Outlook as a youth leader, and am a board member for Equality Downers Grove.
My name is Andy Boynfitch. My pronouns are they, them. I am the program leader for our drop-in center for Youth Outlook here in Downers Grove, and I am the associate pastor at Downers Grove First United Methodist Church.
Good evening, I'm Karen Taylor. I use she, her pronouns. I am an associate principal for students and staff at Downers Grove South High School.
Hi, I'm Erin Ludwig. I use she and her, and I'm an associate principal for student support services at Downers Grove North High School.
And I'm Leslie Sadowski. I am on Downers Grove as a council. I'm also a volunteer with Youth Outlook and Equality Downers Grove. And I feel like I have to give this disclaimer that I am here as an individual and not representing the village itself.
Thank you.
Right, just to start off, what does acceptance look to each one of you?
Alright, same way that we just went. Fantastic. So I feel like acceptance to me looks like understanding and supporting each other, not just because of one thing or another, but as a whole. Even if you don't understand everything about one person, at least respecting that and respecting people's boundaries and just respecting each other.
For me, acceptance looks like accessibility, so having access to safe and welcoming medical care, mental health care. It looks like for our trans folks, whether we fit into a binary or whether we pass, that we are able to enter stores, find clothing we want safely, to use bathrooms without harm, and so on.
Acceptance looks like individuals, every member of the community being able to show up as their authentic selves and know that they will be honored and recognized for who they are. Specifically in schools, it's knowing that you're safe to learn in the comfort of your own skin.
So in addition, I agree with everything that everyone else has said, but recently I heard it called humanizing spaces. That accepting spaces are spaces that humanize others. And I wrote it on a post-it note, stuck it right above my phone at work, because I'm like, I should always be seeking to humanize spaces. What aspect of who you are or how you identify should dictate the ability that you have to go into a space, specifically in schools, to learn. Because a comfortable brain learns better than a nervous brain, and research shows that. So I would say humanizing spaces that accept people regardless of identity factors.
And for me, acceptance looks like, quite frankly, not needing moments like this. It means not needing a Pride Month. It means not needing an API Month. It means not needing a Black History Month. It means that we are all on equal footing. We all have the same starting line. We are all born with the same advantages, disadvantages, and just our individuality and humanity, and we accept one another as is. I long for the day when we don't have to hold panels like this and when we don't have to make proclamations for specific months, because we know that there are still very historically marginalized groups in the community.
Thank you. Thank you. Very thoughtful answers. And I'll ask, whoever wants to jump in here, what do you think the barriers are for acceptance and inclusion in this village here? What are barriers to inclusion and acceptance for LGBTQ folks?
I can start with that. We have barriers all across our structures of power. It's something as simple as having non-gendered bathrooms available in every business and letting folks use the bathroom of choice, to the larger structures where we have bullying and lack of responsiveness to those types of actions. There is a view out there that as long as we are not actively discriminating against a historically marginalized group, that's enough. But we all know, and we're all here, because it's not. So those of us trying to do the work, recognize that we just need to center the experiences of those historically marginalized groups to help us guide how we can change some of these structures and break down some of the barriers to access that Andy referenced earlier.
Yeah, so I believe one of the main barriers, as well as everything that you said, is just accessibility. So access to the resources that you need, whether it be in terms of gender, in terms of sexuality, in terms of race, education, all that sort of stuff. Just having that be accessible to anyone and everyone that would like to have it, as well as just in general having it be an educated thing that people learn in school or out in life, all that sort of stuff. So, and also accessibility to different places where they may feel more accepted, like a GSA and a school or a place like youth outlet. And being able to have those spaces be available to anyone who wants to be there. And that also includes letting people use whatever bathroom they want, having bathrooms for people who are not just male and female, having access to free, healthcare. That is a whole nother thing. But having access to all of those basic human needs is really important.
What are your suggestions for LGBTQ folks and allies to do visibly to show that Downers Grove has a supportive community? And what can allies do to help grow that supportive community? What would you like to see?
Go down on that one. One thing, volunteer. Don't be afraid to show your support. Don't be afraid to be the person that speaks up when you hear stigmatizing or degrading language. Don't assume. Don't make assumptions about somebody's gender, sexuality, any of that. But also, don't assume that the LGBTQ community behaves as one monolith. Remember that everybody has their own humanity, their own experiences, and they are each an individual person. And so if someone is kind enough to share that humanity and those experiences with you, just be sure to center that person, thank them, and don't minimize what they tell you based on the experiences that you've had as an individual.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say be willing to lean into the difficult conversation. Have the courage to talk to that distant family member who might be resistant to the message. And then she touched on identifying and interrupting microaggressions when they happen is so important. One, to bring to the consciousness of the individual who has transgressed, but more importantly to help our LGBTQ community feel that they have an advocate and an ally and can feel more safe in that environment because you're there.
Okay, I'll speak again. Sure. I feel like, especially for allies, one thing that is extremely important and crucial is just listening. Listening to people's experiences, listening to the things that you need to work on if you're doing something incorrectly, like making stereotypes, microaggressions, all that sort of stuff. And if you do those things and don't recognize them, try to tune into that and understand why it's wrong and how to fix it. So making sure that you're being as respectful of people as possible, and if you do mess up, correcting yourself and learning why that's incorrect.
Yeah, we all make mistakes. That's a really good point, Ash. And with the pronouns, I think I've made egregious mistakes in the last 2 years, many times. But I just apologize and just work on it. So that's a really good message. So now we're going to move to the questions that came in, many questions that came in about schools and the youth in this community. And we really, this is the bulk of today's conversation here because we had so much interest around those things. So the first question is how we better support youth, especially those who are facing rejection from their families, which is a hard thing. And the sort of the statement that was made in this question was, is Youth Outlook enough? Is our Youth Outlook drop-in center enough? Or can we and should we be doing more? And so how do we better support LGBTQ plus youth?
So, for reference, I am a youth. So this is definitely tailored to me. I feel like a really important, a really good thing to support LGBT youth, as well as things that I've said previously, is just give resources and let them know that they are safe, and let them know that they're welcome, and let them know that they're not alone. Personally, when I was younger, I would have loved, I'll choose my words carefully, I would have loved to have that sort of communication, whether it be from family or friends or especially teachers, just to have them say, you're not alone, this is okay that you're feeling this, and we know that it can be difficult, but we are here to support you, and possibly give different resources as well is very important. And I feel Youth Outlook is definitely a help and an absolutely phenomenal place that I've seen a lot of people flock to because they can get that support there. But I feel like there's always room for improvement, whether it be getting better sex education in schools, which definitely needs to happen, and having more access to different resources, whether it be ways to stay safe during sex, or having access to different resources and Yeah, like different resources so you can learn more about what someone is going through and having that available to everyone.
Youth Outlook is great. Obviously, I'm totally biased, but there's always more we can do, right? So I'm thinking about what does it look like to support our youth, and particularly those facing rejection. I think a holistic approach, right? All hands on deck. So a few things that come to mind, as Ash mentioned, knowing the resources that are available. So a few that I would just mention here, for youth who maybe are being kicked out of their homes, 360 Youth Services in Naperville provide housing for LGBTQ youth and young adults and just received millions of dollars in grants to build a new space and provide mental health counseling. Evolution Counseling offers therapy and counseling and particularly is thoughtful and mindful of the experiences of BIPOC people and LGBTQ+ people. They're fabulous. Lurie's Children's Hospital for things like hormones and such. And the Transformative Justice Legal Project can help trans folks change their names for free. So those are some great resources for everyone to be aware of in case you've got someone in your life who might need them. I would say too, the everyday places you go, ask the questions. We don't have many doctors and people around here who are clear that I have experience working with trans clients, right? So what you can do is when you go to the doctor, you can say, are you affirming of the LGBTQ community and do you have experience working with transgender people or people who are in same gender relationships? So that, if someone's looking for a doctor, they can find them. Along with that is that you can be a safe space in your setting. Whatever that looks like, if it's in a classroom, if it's in a doctor's office, if it's here in the library, figuring out what it looks like in your setting to do that work. And finally, with rejection, families are complicated. Families are complicated. A lot of times we want to think that either family is 100% on board with understanding or is totally terrible and kick their child out. So many LGBTQ people live in the middle where, it's not always easy, but it's not the worst situation. So being able to hold that reality for youth, that sometimes home is good and sometimes not, but that doesn't mean that they want to be not part of their family is important.
I actually am curious if we can just learn a little bit more about what Youth Outlet does for our youth.
I was just thinking, we were just going to go there.
Right.
Oh, like mine's here.
So Youth Outlet has three major things that they do. First, there is support for parents, which is great. If you are the parent of an LGBTQ child or youth, there is a virtual group that meets on Wednesdays so that you can have support in supporting your child. They also are piloting a grandparents group right now, so that's super fun. Yay, grandparents of LGBTQ people. They do, yeah, super fun. I've gotten to do some education, and it is quite the group. Love them. In a good way. Community education. So Youth Outlook is actually, I know they did some work in sex education at Downers Grove North. Carolyn Walstock went and did some teaching there for the sophomores. We get to go to the GSAs and stuff and work with businesses for how they can best support LGBTQ people. Finally, what we're kind of most known for is our drop-in centers. We have drop-in centers, currently I believe there are 11, across this northern central part of Illinois that are open weekly for youth. And at these drop-in centers for youth ages 12 to 20, we have free time. We always do ropes, which is our rules, and a check-in to see how folks are doing, and then programming, which could be fun stuff like painting drag pumpkins, We have a particular love for My Little Pony, so one of our amazing youth led a My Little Pony party. It's doing safer sex education, right? As Ash spoke about, this is important. So how do we learn about these things if it's not being taught in our schools all the time? We'll do it at Youth Outlook. Right? It's talking about justice issues and so on. So that's kind of what Youth Outlook does.
And just so that you all know in the room, if you don't already know, the Youth Outlook Drop-In Center in Downers Grove was opened last October, and we currently are working with something like 35 youth in that drop-in center. And so it says something about the need, right? And everybody is. People are coming and people are staying. And so,
yeah, we saw 34 last week when we went and painted windows, but we've had about 56 at some point enter into our space in the past 8 months.
let's move to the schools. Yeah.
So, we have a 7-part question.
Thank you wherever you are.
So I'm just going to let our panelists include all of the information on their own instead of me asking them 7 questions. But how do the high schools foster inclusion and acceptance?
I'll kick off the 7-part question. Whenever we're asked this question, I like to remember what happened in 2020, and actually not the pandemic. But in 2020, schools actually started to get some guidance from ISB, which we had not had before. And as you, what's ISB? Illinois State Board of Education. Started to put out guidance on how schools could be more inclusive and fostering safe environments for students. We had not had a lot of that at the time. And as you know, schools are an interesting touch point in society when it comes to things. So we were, in March 2020, there's a document, and for those of you who are interested, I wanted to put the real name down because it actually is a really fascinating and powerful read. Supporting transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming students in schools. So in March 2020, schools got guidance on how ISB would like us to handle things like name changes, and times when families maybe weren't supportive of what a student's identity was at school. We had no guidance until then. And so we've really used that as kind of a touchstone. We go back to that, we look at that when we're faced with individual situations, because so much of how we support students, what a gender support plan looks like, what we tell teachers, how we work with families, has to do with the individual in front of us. We use that as kind of a touchstone text. Also, then in October 2020, is we put out an implementation guide for inclusive curriculum. So some of the things that are happening in terms of LGBTQIA history showing up in curriculum, they gave some guides and unit guides on how you can integrate that into your stories, because that story wasn't being told. The historical story wasn't there, and so we put out guidance there. That has really been helpful for us as school leaders as we look to make systemic changes and address systemic needs. But I will speak at least for my school, and then I'm Karen can add a little bit more. So I'm at North. When it comes to making sure students know where to go for help, we use the general narrative that we use with all other students, that the first place to go is your counseling and student support services department. And then we're able to tailor a plan that works for that student. Because some students aren't comfortable, they are not out to their parents, all of that matters when we look at creating a support plan for students in the school. Now, I've met with students, and I listen to the students, student voice is huge. We are hearing our students ask for a little bit more like large-scale information about where I go. How do I get this out a little bit different? And I don't have an answer for that right now, but it's an area that I'd like to develop. We have different clubs, we have GSA, we have PRISM, we have our Black Student Union, Latino Student Union, and those things favor our colleagues. But we don't have a large-scale announcement that says, if you need support with the gender support plan, here's where you come. We don't have that yet, but I hear that narrative starting with our students, and so I think it's a need we're going to have to contemplate moving forward on how to make that a little bit more clear. Because sometimes for the adults, we think things are clear, and they're not. We do that a lot, actually. So I've heard that as a need emerge this year, but in general, we definitely tell our students to meet with their counselors and the student support team, because then we can make sure that what we're communicating out is authentically what they want from us to be able to share. I think that was one and 2 parts of the 7-part question.
Yeah, they all kind of flow together. And certainly some other things that popped into my mind as I was listening to Dr. Ludwig is that we also have representation visually now in our hallways of famous mathematicians or scientists or athletes, etc., that represent the LGBTQ+ community. And then I'm thinking too about specific ways that we've helped individual students, whether it be petitioning with the Illinois High School Sports Association to allow a trans student to participate in a sport that is the sport of the gender they identify as. Requires, unfortunately, still permission from the state of Illinois, but we certainly advocate for our students in that way. And providing changing spaces that are safe and comfortable for our students during sports practices and or PE. Certainly we've got some growth to continue there, but it's a place where we're looking at how we can continue to grow and better support our students. In terms of what teachers can do and how we're supporting teachers to learn about it, we do provide through ongoing equity professional development specific to the needs of LGBTQ youth. And we have partnered with the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance to provide some of that in the past. And then also we have a personalized professional learning team that are faculty members who have a particular interest in working with this population, who have really dove deeper into the topic and have been great advocates for our students. Teachers can access our diversity coordinators. They can access anybody who is on that panel to talk through how to better support their students in their classrooms or how to talk about certain topics within their classroom. One of the questions, I don't know if it's part of this 7-part or not, but about restrictions of what teachers can and can't say. Our expectation of teachers is that they create an inclusive, welcoming environment for every student, regardless of how they identify. And so, certainly I'm sure that there are teachers that are doing a better job at that than others. We will continue to support our teachers along that journey.
One of the specific ways that we have tried to do that, and again, this has to do with we're getting feedback from our staff and feedback from students, is I heard this year that we really need to take a united front against microaggressions. And we've gotten feedback from our staff and feedback from the kids that sometimes people are faced with witnessing something that they know is wrong and they struggle knowing how to interrupt it. And so we're really talking about how can we tap into some of the research-based bystander training that exists that can really tell us how do you interrupt that, because often, and I've heard this through some very painful bias incidents that we've worked through at North, that, oh, it was a joke, okay, but it's not funny. And so how can we have the tools to interject in that and stop that? And I think our teachers would be more confident if they felt like they had our tools, and so would our student leaders, and I've heard it there as well. One thing I will celebrate about some of the work that we have done, especially around bathrooms, because bathrooms and changing spaces are a difficult thing for schools to work around because often it involves large-scale renovations or land blocking of buildings and things. I was happily in a meeting earlier this year where there was a light facelift happening in a space in the building, and someone who was not me said, well, we might as well just make them non-gendered bathrooms while we're at it. And I was like, oh, yeah, but that has a lot to do with the people who kept the narrative going and kept bringing it up and raised those questions. And we're the squeaky wheels because those at the table were all white, cisgender identifying people. And if we don't have people who are willing to have that conversation, that will become part of the questions we go through when we're making light facelifts to places in the building. And so I applaud the students who have been a part of that and all the staff who made that part of what it was, because that's the end goal, is that it's just part of what we talk about.
Okay, that was a lot of information and I'm trying to process, but I have a few points. So, I am a student athlete. I played badminton last year for my school, and I had to go through the process of getting verified, I guess, by the IHSA to play. And I will say, that was a very, very fast process. It went really smoothly. I just had to turn in my information, get my parents' approval. That was pretty much it on my part. And it went really fast as well. As in, I think after maybe even a few days, I was able to play competitively, like for points in badminton. In terms of bathrooms and changing spaces, some people here know that I talked with the PE department chair as well as Mr. Schwartz, who was the principal for Downers Grove South, about a change that was happening to the locker rooms in the school, and I was not pleased with it. So I talked to them, I did my own research and surveys and all of that sort of stuff, and all three of us were able to figure out a good workaround in how it was able to be set to where it was practical and also inclusive. And I feel another thing that is, it's somewhere here. one of the questions is like what to create inclusive systems. I feel that that isn't communicated as much as it should be. Like from what you said, I haven't known about most of that, and I am pretty like in the community, especially with all of my friends, and I try to be helpful to adults whenever I can be about getting people's input and all that sort of stuff, and I haven't heard about a lot of that. So I feel having more transparency between the students and the teachers on what's happening in the community, why things are happening the way that they are, and how things are being changed would be very important. And I feel that also talking to the students directly who are impacted by different decisions would be extremely helpful before a huge change is made, like it was with the locker rooms. But I'll get into that maybe later. If you want to, come talk to me afterwards. I'll give you a synopsis. I'll be here all night. But that's all that for that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's exciting to hear all the things that you mentioned, and one thing I'd be curious about too, it sounds like there's great work in support of teachers. I wonder about the rest of the staff too. Are students engaged with security guards? You know, there's the tech team that's figuring out what to do about names on the technological side and that sort of stuff. So I'd be super curious about whether that work is happening too. And then there's so much good happening, and yet we still hear very sad stories from our students. So I'm excited that you're acknowledging microaggressions. We just hear some awful experiences in the schools, and often they're in the places that are not supervised, right? So hallways and cafeterias are mentioned, stairwells, because bad things are happening in stairwells. So I'm excited to hear what you're saying, and there's so much to do, so looking forward to partnering with you.
Yeah, I am excited. I will speak to the staff training questions. Our equity professional development does include everybody. So support staff along with certified staff, security. The building's essentially shut down. So if you ever tried to call on one of those Mondays, no one's answering. Because everybody is in the training. But it has been really interesting, especially because I've seen a real positive impact on the training on our main office staff, how we're receiving people, because essentially that's what greets you when you come in the door. You know, and so people have felt like, oh, I just feel so much better equipped on how to support somebody. I know now what questions not to ask with the registration and things like that. And so it's been really helpful there. And again, we know that our tentacles can't reach all of it. The online is a real big problem. I always say I'm grateful that I did not have a cell phone the way that our students do, because when I went home, the bullying didn't follow me, right? And so that's kind of the world that we're facing in now. So really my goal in terms of that is to continue to make the spaces where you know you can bring that forward and there'll be action, right? Because if we have people who don't bring it forward, we can't act, but we then have to follow through with it and follow through with it in a very strong way. So,
Is that all of a sudden? I think
That's like 3.
just they dovetail, right? Yeah.
I guess the only thing we may not have touched on is there any misinformation coming out of the schools, do you think?
I didn't really understand that question.
No, it's, I think, like I said, they were just.
It was me that asked this awful question. The reason I asked it is because my experience of the schools here was from the 1980s. I don't even have any children in the schools now, so I was really just interested in knowing what's it like now. Andy, I would, I'm really glad that you brought up that there's still horrible things happening. Not because I'm glad that it's happening, but because it's important for everyone to know that. As far as the misinformation, I wasn't talking about misinformation coming out of the schools. I was talking about, the misinformation campaigns that are being waged against us by clergy, by Republicans. Sorry, any Republicans, but that's kind of how you are, how you are. And, I think but, you know, and these microaggressions are happening in unsupervised areas, yeah? They're still happening, and I think the reason is misunderstanding of what it is to be homosexual or gender divergent. That it's, you know, there's people saying that we're pedophiles, people saying that we're, you know, it's a sin, all sorts of things. And it's, for me, it's the school's role to counter that misinformation with proper information. So, you know, do you notice, I can't even remember my question. Do you notice misinformation coming into the schools that you have to counter, and are you doing so?
Well, as we sit here, the District 99 Board of Education is meeting to approve the keeping of the book Genderqueer in our school libraries.
Which is passed.
Did it
I
pass?
passed, okay. So through that process, there certainly has been quite the campaign against the book, but really against LGBTQ people, right? Which is really against all of us. And so I'm so proud, actually, of how our students have responded in the wake of some pretty difficult, treacherous situations for teens to have to navigate. They have bravely spoken at board meetings in front of people who are there diametrically opposed to them and truthfully that hate them. And just really, really proud of our students for having done that. Lots of allies and also members of the LGBTQ plus community as well. I also will say, before I was in my current role, I was a dean for 9 years in a public high school, not in Downers Grove, but so for the last 15 years of my career, I've been pretty much dedicated to all things discipline. And anecdotally, I will say that I have seen a shift positively in that I'm hearing less rhetoric from youth that is anti-LGBTQ. I'm aware of fewer incidents that have led to conflict and or violence against youth. I am still also aware that there is a lot of work to be done there. And I think as much as anything, it's about the prevention of that. And that starts with the education of our students. We focused this year at Downers Grove South and North as well, but I can speak more to my experience at South, on belonging being the overarching theme for the whole year. And that every student belongs here. And that includes, every student was given a sticker to put on their water bottle or their laptop, etc., that says, "You belong here." We had a banner, a week-long welcome back at the beginning of the school year, focused on belonging. And belonging was also the overarching question that we used to inform our equity work with the adults. How can I enhance a sense of belonging through examining myself, through examining my relationships, through my professional practice? And so really trying to create a school community where everyone feels like they belong, and emphasizing the importance of that to all members of the community, as students included, that while you may look different than me and identify different than me, you belong here just like I belong here, and our school is better because we're different.
And then just to add on to that was also the theme at North. What that does, while it doesn't stop bias and incidents from happening. It creates a baseline understanding of what we do and don't stand for, and then we're able to apply that across the board. And so that culture part is kind of what we can put that expectation over all members. And I would say I've had conversations, some spicy conversations with some community members and parents over the last 2 years, because I was also involved with COVID, right? So I had lots of people telling me lots of things. I would use that same theme with parents when they were upset that something was allowed, or something when they were concerned with the way someone was expressing their identity in their child's class. Everyone belongs here, and I'm able to use that. And so while it doesn't stop some of the things that we know, we want to create a culture where we hear about it more. It gives us a baseline expectation of how we expect people to treat each other and people to behave in our schools.
So one part of the question that we didn't answer that there's like good news for is, do any curricula require teaching on these subjects?
Yes.
The answer is yes. And particularly recently, Illinois passed a new sex education curriculum. As a nerd who went through it, oh my gosh, it is fabulous. The ages and levels that are talking about things. It's really beautiful and exciting.
Did you say they have passed it?
Yes, yes.
So good sex ed coming to the school year.
I'll just add one more thing about the misinformation piece. Obviously, as, again, someone who's part of the community leadership in Downers Grove, we can't forget that some of those things that potentially are being circulated around schools is coming from somewhere. And so we as community leaders and we as adults need to be modeling the behavior and the words and the kindness that we expect from others. And I do want, there's just a little bit of a misinformation around tolerance. It's important to be tolerant of other people's basic humanity. So that includes their religion, their ethnicity, their race, their gender identity, their sexuality. These are just things that are part of your, just the fabric of who you are. Tolerance does not necessarily extend to when you hear bigoted or hateful statements. It doesn't mean that you should have to listen to them and take that in. That's not tolerance. So I want to also be clear that it is okay to stand up against bigoted and hateful statements. That's not being intolerant. That is caring for the basic humanity and the fabric of our community and all of the individuals that live here. So I feel like that's something that gets tossed around a lot. We probably will get into the social media question, but that's a big part of that social media, of lacking tolerance. No, it's just, I respect everybody's humanity. And I'm not going to accept folks having to listen to bigoted and traumatizing statements about them. Because with each microaggression and with each stereotype or stigmatizing language that gets thrown around, that is just an additional trauma added on to our youth that they don't need to be hearing from adults. And so we need to be that model to show that we are not going to accept that from people and that we really do believe that they belong there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mom.
There was one more part of that question that hasn't been answered. I think it's interesting, so I'm just going to be bold. What support can people from outside the schools offer to people like you who care about us? How can we have your backs?
Run for school board.
Yeah, I can also go along with that. Run for school board, show up to meetings, come to things like this, make your voice heard. I know not everybody feels confident in doing that, and that's okay. Email is always available if you're not the person that can stand up in front of someone and in front of a microphone and say these things. But I know I have talked to other community leaders who have said, thank you so much for emailing me and supporting us. You have no idea what it means just to get a positive and supportive message after just 2 years of feeling like you're being beaten down. So supporting the folks who are doing the good work, and if you feel like it, getting in and jumping in for school board is important.
Does that help clarify? Thank you for clarifying your
Oh,
question.
there's more.
Absolutely.
Wait, there's more. No. I feel like another important thing about like supporting from outside the school is just getting the word out about whether like getting the word out about places like Youth Outlook or other sort of fundraisers and things like that that can support different communities, whether it be LGBT, BIPOC, all of that sort of stuff. just getting the word out and making sure that people are supported, as well as if you have youth yourself or kids who are in school, making sure that they know about all that sort of stuff, making sure that they are aware that they have help if they need it, because that is extremely important, because not a lot of people know all of the amazing things that we have in our schools as well as outside of our schools. And we always want people to get the help that they want and need.
And if you're not someone to run for school board, we certainly need you to vote for school board. And be aware, educate yourselves on issues and activities and things like that where you can go and physically have a presence to be the narrative that will be supportive and inclusive of our students.
And with the upcoming primary at the end of June, we do have what are resources on our website.
Public library website, right?
Yes, public library website. Exactly.
So there's this question about how does, we have high school representation here, but the question here is what support is available for LGBTQ students in Downers Grove elementary schools? And this is a really, a question that is more, less represented by our panelists, but also more tricky because there are a lot of opinions about young kids, right? So I'm going to let Andy take this.
Yeah, just a wee little bit of information. Social workers are in elementary schools as well, and hopefully they are good resources. We send a lot of emails to our social workers and counselors and PRISM and GSA leaders. So I would say social workers should be able to help in these situations. And again, school libraries, right? Libraries are a great resource, and when they get to keep the books that they have, their access to those books in our school libraries. Along with that, Youth Outlook is in the process of starting a group for young ones. And I know that some local schools in the area are having conversations about how do we start basically GSAs at the elementary school levels.
There's a need.
Yeah. Folks are coming out younger and younger. I've got a very gay child who came out as non-binary at 9. So.
Yeah, but also for the ones that aren't out, right? The ones
Yeah.
that are just observing.
And as a parent of a child who is in a District 58 school, I can say that even just if you are a parent or you are a grandparent, start having those conversations. I started calling around. I mean, obviously, our monthly our new sex ed bill covers consent with basic things like touching, even hugs at the start of kindergarten, which is a great just first step in that sex ed that we were talking about. I've also had plenty of books from the library about, what are your words? Essentially discussing, normalizing, asking people how they prefer to be identified, what their pronouns are. And she and I have sat down. She's 6.5. She and I have sat down and talked about gender as a spectrum, which we now know there's solid science to suggest that both biological sex and gender occur on the spectrum, now that the bias is finally starting to drop and we're putting federal dollars into researching it. And so I literally just sat down with a line with her and said, some people feel like they're all the way on the end here on the boy end, and there's girl end, and there's everything in the middle. So where do you feel like, right now you would identify with yourself? This is where I feel I am. And there are some folks who don't consider themselves she or he, so they prefer they. And it's a really simple visual to do with young kids so that they can be a little bit more accepting and make it just part of the terminology from young on to start building those discussions.
Okay. To kind of go off that, I feel another thing that people don't understand is that kids kids know more about themselves than you think that they do. Like, nods, yes. Good. But kids want to experiment and they want to find themselves. I know this because I am a kid and I want to find myself. And I did when I was younger. I remember in this is a bit older than you guys were talking about, but I remember in 5th grade I started researching why I feel the way I do, and then I figured out eventually that I'm trans. Whoop-de-doo. But having those kinds of conversations with your kids is extremely important, and also knowing that your kids' thoughts and feelings might change. That's totally normal. It's totally okay to experiment with that sort of stuff. Because in the end, what they're trying to do is find their true selves. And that's what's important. Because that's what's going to make them happy and have a good, successful life.
Well, we have 10 minutes left. So do we want to do a couple of general societal questions?
Yeah, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Yeah. These are all very important questions, but
Can we go longer?
can we go longer? We'll see how long people want to stick around. Andy, let's talk about what support is needed in terms of how are faith communities involved in supporting LGBTQ+.
Well, we'll start by saying not all faith communities are involved in supporting LGBTQ communities. I think that's crucial to name. And even here in Downers Grove, which you might not know, we've got 2 ministeriums, which are like clergy clubs. And one allows women clergy and the other doesn't. So you can imagine how that goes around LGBTQ inclusion. What I would say faith communities can and should do. Some are in programs like for Methodists, there's Reconciling Ministries. Others they call Open and Affirming. These are congregations that have taken the time to do the work of understanding what LGBTQ stands for and what that looks like in the church, to look at how do I have an inclusive interpretation of Scripture, and have voted and said, yes, we are affirming of all people, including people of various sexual orientations and gender identities. So that's one thing that faith communities can do. And if you were to look for a faith community, I recommend checking their website. And if you cannot find that clearly listed, I wouldn't go there. Along with that, they can challenge what their denominations are doing. I'm part of a denomination that is homophobic and transphobic. And so we can vote against that and stand up against that. Churches can hire LGBTQ clergy. They can do same-gender weddings. And if you're part of a faith community that doesn't, I encourage you to explore, if that's in line with your beliefs. They can also do name change rituals and celebrations to honor the beauty of LGBTQ people and not just focus on fighting proverb passages. And invest in the community, right? When I think about what people can do, it's voice, vote, actions, and funding. Use your voice, right, in favor of people. Use your vote for folks. Act against hatred and fund things, right? We spend money. That's one way you show that you care. So support groups like Youth Outlook and Equality Downers Grove. Partner with them. And also understand too, right? I'm saying this as a clergy person, that we have caused so much harm. So there may be times where we are not invited into spaces or when people need us to not come at them to evangelize, right? And we can most be helpful by simply witnessing and honoring people's existence and not pushing a belief.
Thank you, Randy.
Thanks. In the current social climate that we're in, how can we keep, or try to keep, or help keep all people safe when in many states there are attempts to limit the rights of groups of people. And obviously this community is one of the ones being targeted.
I will say get politically active. You can canvass, you can help candidates who support inclusive values, you can do your research, whether it be dollars or minutes that you spend working for them. Support broad voting rights efforts. So work for candidates who are going to do things like pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, because all of these things are connected. It is not just one small group that is going to be marginalized with a particular policy. So support those types of efforts that ensure that everybody is getting their right to vote and their voice heard. joint organizations like EQDG and Youth Outlook that are doing the work. But it's got to be a little bit more walk the walk in these times rather than just talk the talk. So find the place where you are comfortable and a place, an organization or a candidate that will meet you where you're at, and just jump in with, you know, what seems to be the easiest, and then who knows, maybe one day you'll run for office too.
A tiny small thing you can do is on June 12th, come to Pride in the parking lot, and we will have Say Gay and Protect Trans Kids postcards and addresses of folks in power to send them to, along with scripts, so that we can send some postcards to folks in other states advocating for our siblings in other places.
It's also just going to be a fun event, so come, please.
All right, I think we should open it
June
to,
12th.
Multiply.
Sunday.
so, yeah, June 12th, noon to 5.
So, quick question, everybody okay with staying a little bit longer?
Absolutely.
It's totally okay, so why don't we try to take a couple of questions from the audience? If you
Yes.
have any.
And if you could speak up, you can pull your mask down to say what you need to say, Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to point out, because it was spoken about by members of the panel here, but there's information over here that kind of goes further than some of the things that, and obviously time is limited, but there's a handout on how to talk to your kids about LGBTQ issues, how kids can talk to their parents. When we talk about faith, excellent document put out by the Presbyterian Church in Mount Kisco, New York. They did an exploration about why do we hate gay people so much as a church. And they took all the cloud passages that I heard Andy talk about, those passages in the Bible that are used to oppress gay people, and uncover the truth about them. And it's all misinformation. It's all lies. We've all been fed this our entire lives. Excellent document. It's on the resources sheet. If you want to get more explanation about that, provided to people that are struggling with families that are giving them a whole Bible, Bible passage discussion. So, lots of resources. Make sure you check them out.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the group, from the rest of you? Yes.
I probably want to brought up the grade school one because I work at the sub and I think I've been in every school in the district and then the one next door. And I see a lot of microaggression with kids like in 3rd grade, you're so gay. And it's like, what does that mean? And I know what it means, they're being insulting, but I just want them to start thinking about what they're saying, and I guess in terms of like reaching out to the younger kids, maybe just, I guess, reach out more to the teachers and the social workers of things maybe you really shouldn't be saying, or maybe another way to talk. I guess it's just something that I've noticed a lot this year. There's a lot of microaggression with that.
Yeah.
And I've actually even seen a lot of kids, like I'm kind of walking by to make sure they know I'm watching them. And I'll hear little snippets of conversation, like, well, I'm not sure if I'm gay or not, but I think I kind of like girls, but I'm not really sure. So I mean, and these are kids like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade that are having these conversations with each other, and it's like, you don't have anyone to talk to. Aside from your little table group when we're working on the English lesson, I mean, I think there's really a need for more information at that age, especially with kids maturing physically so much earlier.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, well, I do. That's definitely something that needs to be worked on, and I feel that's something that both teachers and parents can work on. Just being that resource that kids have to know what is and isn't okay to say. And a lot of the time, like you said, is this English group table the only place that you're able to talk to this? A lot of the time it is. People aren't able to talk to their parents about issues that they're dealing with, or their emotions because that's seen as weak, all of that sort of stuff. So being open to your kids, like, be okay with being vulnerable, because everyone eventually is going to have to be at one point or another in their life. And knowing that it's okay is extremely important, because then people know that it is okay to share who you really are. And even though it's going to get some negative feedback, everything that you do is, you're not going to be able to make everyone happy. So being able to make as many people as happy and comfortable and safe as possible is extremely important. And that can start at just a third grade lunch table.
Thank you.
I've got 2 questions.
Oh,
And
sorry.
then we'll come to-
When you mentioned the research-based, like effective bystander training, is there any way that the schools could collaborate and share some of that information through EQDG and some of the other, so beyond the schools, people have a better understanding how to be allies that make a difference? And if we had enough time, I'd love to hear from people instances where you saw or experienced a bystander doing something that made a difference. Just for examples, for those of us who want to be better at that.
Sure. So that's actually, I'm working with, or the district is working with the parent organization Grit 2 to talk, and the D99 Foundation, to talk about, like, how are we really going to do this, but really do it? Because we can't do it and not include the community and not include parents. There is a organization called Right to Be that we're looking at right now. I have an appointment to talk to someone about what they could do for student leaders and staff. I don't know if we'll go with them, but there's plenty out there. And I think it needs to be research-based, and it also needs to be relevant for student leaders. I really do think our student leaders in the school are where we start, because you have to have a certain amount of social clout to take the risk to interrupt, right?
Yeah.
And that does make a difference. And so I guess I can share one thing I saw. I did actually, we had a student leader group, a student congress. Actually, it was a group of leaders that we brought together because they represent different identities. And so these microaggressions are occurring in spaces where I thought this was like the safest of spaces, and it was not. And someone made a comment about someone's gender identity, and I watched another student turn and said, I don't know how you can sit at this table and say that, so I'm going to let you think about that for a minute. And I was like, okay. But but they had, the network that they had built was close enough that he could come that direct, right? And we had already said that that was a shared value in the space, and we had those agreements, and we reviewed those agreements every single time. Because we did have people from young conservatives and young liberals, and we have groups with different opinions all coming together to talk. You have to have that safe space. But I think that goes bigger, and I can talk about this all night long, on restorative practices and how are you cultivating the culture to say what is inclusivity, what is belonging, how are you doing it? Because then you have those agreements across all different identities and belief systems that you can keep coming back to.
I would also just like to comment, June 15th at 6:30 or 7, don't remember as the program coordinator, but at 6:30 or 7 on June 15th as a virtual program. We are going to have how to be a better ally 101, so check that out.
Do that.
Do that, yeah.
Don't sleep on the library resources. This library is doing incredible work. I've had the privilege to be on the equity advisory team, and the stuff that's already happening here in regards to resources on allyship, pronouns, all of this stuff, and what's to come is really good news. So again, here's an organization that has access to so much information and is making it accessible for all of us.
All right, well, as long as we're doing this, Andy did our pronoun 101 program last June, and at last count, that video has had over 500 views.
All right, somebody else had a question here. Yes.
I think my was kind of what you just said, but specifically for like for high school. I wonder what we can do to like include more of the parents of the kids who are outside of the community, because I think, supporting parents and kids inside the community, like, we're here, we're looking for resources, we're working with people, like, I think if you don't have any skin in the game, you might, especially at this time of year, you kind of see things with rose-colored glasses, windows, they're the same sex couple on an ad, there's Target merch, and it's like, wow, you solved this. But I think a lot of parents truly would be really surprised to find out actual microaggressions, incidents, the pain that kids are going through, that you've heard that you're referencing. What my child has gone through in high school in this town, in the year 2022. And I think a lot of parents who don't have kids in the community would be very shocked. So how can we, send that message, we belong, and kind of, without being too, I don't know how to say it, antagonistic, but really kind of let them know that this is a problem that we're still working to solve. Because I think a lot of the things that happen in the school, and not that teenagers all listen to their parents, because I also teach middle school, so I know that. But a lot of it starts at home. And if you're not explicitly teaching your kid to accept, I can't be sure what you're going to do with it. You kind of assume, well, I don't teach bigotry, but do you truly teach acceptance? And I think there's a big difference there. And I think a lot could be done bringing the parents of the non-LGBTQ kids into the conversation about this, or what kind of message can the school put out for all the parents to be in on this message.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'm just curious, in terms of the schools, has any of this been linked to anti-bullying?
Yes, yeah.
And if so, how does that work? And does that create a larger network of people who are students and staff who are sympathetic to the LGBTQ community as victims of bullying?
Yeah, I would say yes, it has been. And that's actually the bystander training is not specifically to the LGBTQIA plus community. A lot of that is not at all. And so it's just, but it is a form of harassment, regardless. And so it can be tackled in the same way. And so I do think it opens up passageways for people who may have beliefs that cause them to pause and maybe not interject as often, but we look at it from a bullying standpoint and an interrupting standpoint. I found that it does give kind of an opening in to have the conversation with people who may have hesitated prior.
Thank you. Yeah, so let's, since obviously are running over, yeah, so thank you so much for our
coming and for sharing your thoughts. And thank you all for coming and really listening to the things that our panelists have to say, as well as posing the questions that they actually responded to. And thank you for clarifying your separate priorities. Thank you all. And
thank you, Ash, Andy, Karen, Aaron.
Yes, thank you. And feel free to, if you're interested in joining to volunteer with Equality Downers Grove, we've got information over there. You can talk to me. If you're interested in knowing a little more about Youth Outlook and have kids, you can talk to Andy or me or after the program or anytime. Thank you all.
And that was
Thank you.